You're listening to One Free Family, a new take on peaceful parenting, where you can hear ideas for helping to raise free, independent, and peaceful children. Visit onefreefamily.com to connect and listen. Here are your hosts, James and Taylor Davis.
Welcome back to another episode of One Free Family. This is James.
And Taylor.
And today we have a mailbag episode.
That was like a weirdly quiet welcome from you.
What
Usually
do you mean?
You're a little more like, welcome back.
And I think I'm sitting closer to the mic, so I'm trying to be less hot on the mic.
Okay.
That's
right.
Feedback we've received in the past. So
okay.
I'm trying to keep it a little less hot
Just
on the mic.
making sure you're all right.
Don't worry, buddy. Once I get revved up, raring to go, I'm going to be, you're shaking your head no, but I'm nodding my head yes. I'm going to be raring to go, and I'm going to be firing off knowledge.
Can you start this over?
No.
Yes.
Yeah, moving on. All right. So we have a bunch of cool questions that have been brought up in the One Free Family Facebook group recently. And I want to actually first go out and say, I never planned to make any big announcements about what I've been doing with social media in my life.
Oh, no.
But here it comes.
He's announcing.
I'm not making a big announcement. I'm not going to put it on Facebook, but just for the people that are in there wondering, I'm not trying to ignore any of the questions in the One Free Family Facebook group. I just realized for my life that Facebook had become sort of a time sink. And so I haven't been going on it to scroll and read things. So that's it. I just want to let people know not to take it personally if you haven't seen me respond. You can take it personally if Taylor's not responding because she's still just on Facebook constantly. But I'm just kidding.
Everybody, James is off social media. Announcement. Now funnel all your attention his way.
What I really am hoping for here is that you're talking in hushed tones with your people in your life right now and looking to me as an inspiration.
Yeah, for sure.
Your own sincere social media addiction.
Every day I wake up and aspire to be more like you.
Well, I know.
Yeah.
You hear me downstairs being all productive in the mornings.
Well, I'm just scrolling Facebook.
It's true. It's true in your pajamas, right?
That's what I sleep in, yep.
Yep, there it is. And then what you stay in for some time after you wake up as well. For some reason, this is really making me smile. I'm back.
You're being a bully.
You said I was all quiet at the beginning, but now I'm really rolling.
Here you are.
So anywho, we did get some cool questions from there. So we're going to talk about those on the episode today because I think there's a few good conversation starters that maybe aren't like the full force 45-minute episode length questions, but you're still making faces.
Oh, I'm just really excited about talking with you this morning. It's going to be nice.
Okay. All right. So the first question we're going to dig right into is from our friend Kelly, who brings up the question, how do you explain to your homeschooled child why some and most kids go to school without seeming like you're bashing school? And I think this actually brings up an interesting broader question, which is, how do you explain your family's values and life decisions to your kids without seeming judgmental or superior to everyone else, right? Because especially if you're the type of parent.
Right, like if you're off Facebook, like how do you explain that? Why you've made that choice without seeming superior? Or like you think you're superior?
It's not easy. Well, in my case, you just never explain it, but that was good. Good job. We're back, everyone. But I do think this is interesting because so often, and you see this even in intentional parenting circles, people tend to define themselves by what they're not as often as by defining themselves by what they are, right? So look politically, how many people voted in the last presidential election by saying, well, I just could never vote for X person, so I voted for Y person instead. Very often, religious or non-religious people will frame things the same way, right? They're, instead of extolling the virtues of the belief system they've landed on, they go about their time criticizing other people's belief systems. And this is really challenging, I think, because, I don't know, maybe it's a Western culture thing. I don't know exactly what the reasons are, but it is difficult, right?
I think also it's kind of ironic, but I think the prevalence of social media use actually does kind of contribute to this situation because I think there's like a forum now for people to like broadcast all of their decisions that they make in a much like with them to cast that out to the world with a much wider net. And I think that we see this, with this comes a lot of like judgment or perceived judgment, even if there isn't judgment. And everybody's kind of parenting choices are just front and center for everybody else to respond and react to. And so I think sometimes that like contributes to this idea of, I'm making this choice because these other choices are bad, right?
Yeah, well, and I think especially if you're making a choice that's against the norm, oftentimes you did think the norm wasn't good.
Right, it didn't feel like a good fit for you.
And it takes a lot of intentional decision-making and planning oftentimes to walk away from the norm. A lot of times, like especially in the schooling issue, there's a lot of societal infrastructure that funnels people towards school, right? I mean, again, back here in the West, you have property tax, which basically has essentially everyone, even if you rent, paying into schools. You have just kind of the general economy, which oftentimes, if there are children involved, you sort of have to be a two-parent income unless one person is doing really, really, really well. There's also societal messages around one's ability to homeschool or whatever that make it seem a lot more challenging than perhaps it really needs to be. And so anyway, going about your days and moving toward this extremely intentional decision, yeah, you've walked away from the norm in a pretty significant way. And how do we explain that to our kids, right?
Yeah.
So we've come to them and they're going to ask. Our kids have noticed that most kids go to school too. And we can use other examples too here in a second. But when they kind of nod to us like, hey, why are we the ones who don't have to go to school? What do we say?
Yeah, well, I don't know. What do we say? I mean, I guess
we haven't had this conversation in a long time.
Yeah, we haven't. I mean, our older two are old enough that we've had these conversations a lot and they're kind of just comfortable with where we are right now. I think that it hasn't been just like a big sit down one-time conversation, right? It's just kind of it comes up in daily life every so often. And I've just kind of talked with my kids about, because I guess I will say, like, of course I'm choosing this very intentionally because there are things about our traditional school system that I don't choose for my kids. But at the same time, I really do just like to talk to them about what I do believe and then leave the door open for them to say what they think and to ask questions. So I've often just talked about it with my kids, and this reflects the reason we've made this choice, or one of the reasons. My philosophy on learning, right? And I've just talked to them about how I think that in all of the research that I've done and all my life experience, I really see that learning is happening all the time, and that people really learn best when they're pursuing things that they're interested in on their own terms with good support. And that when they're motivated to learn something because they care about it, not because somebody's requiring them to, that they really learn it better. And so I just kind of talk about the reasons that we've chosen the life we've chosen. I don't say as much about school is bad, blah, blah, blah to them, because I actually don't believe that in a vacuum, right? I don't think that that's true. And we have so many friends and family members whose kids do attend school, and a lot of those kids are doing great. And I don't really harbor judgment towards our friends and family members who've chosen that. So I just want my kids to see it as like one of the options that's available to families.
Well, and I think you point out when you say one of the options, I think it's important to remember that whatever your family is choosing, you're not choosing something against one other option, right? Like,
right. There's many options.
There's this whole wide world out there. And if you juxtapose whatever decision you've landed on and just pin it against one other thing, that can actually limit your child's thinking about the world and the options in general, right? So in the case of schooling, there's homeschooling, there's super self-directed homeschooling, like unschooling. There are liberated learner centers, free schools, Sudbury schools, Waldorf schools,
Montessori schools. Yeah, there's so many
traditional
different
private
kinds.
schools. There are all sorts of different options when it comes to how children can spend their time. So just for the same reason, I won't sit and give my kids a 30-minute speech about why Montessori isn't the approach that we're using for our homeschooling even. There's plenty of Montessori-style homeschoolers and Waldorf-inspired homeschoolers and so on. I just don't feel like I need to get into why I haven't chosen all of these other options. Instead, I'd like to emphasize why we're doing the things we're doing. So in the case of homeschooling, I'll talk about, or like especially our sort of radically self-directed homeschooling, I'll talk about the fact that I trust their judgment for how they want to spend their time. I'll talk about how I have enjoyed watching them pursue their own passions, and I'll point out all the beautiful things that have come from that, like their ability to learn to master things, their flexibility to move from one interest to the next. There's so many positive things about what we are doing that why would I need to get into the negatives of some other approach that I'm not even using.
Yeah, right. Like talking about kind of why it feels like it's working well for our family. And I've asked them how they feel about it too and what's going well for them. And they also know, because I've said to them, well, they have friends who are in school. So they sometimes hear about different things that their friends do at school and I'd say both positive and negative, like things that their friends report positively about and things that their friends don't love. And I've always said to them, if a different thing than we're doing now is ever something that you want to try, you tell us and we'll talk about it and we'll explore it. For us, self-directed learning means that you still get to make decisions about how you want to learn or where you want to spend your days, even if they don't look exactly like they look right now. So I think that's another piece of it too, is just letting them know that they still, all of the other options that are out there are things that we can explore too. And I really like what you said about how there's so many options. Like I like that as a worldview in general. Like nothing is really ever this or that or black and white. Right. Like there's so much of the reason we are living the way we're living is because we see how much gray area there is in everything and how much that thinking and living outside the box, how much joy that can bring when you see that there's more than just, in this example, public school or not.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's okay to take a stand on a particular issue. Like one of our kids once brought an example to me where he had heard of a kid whose parents were like kind of rough with them in kind of like a disciplinary way physically. Mm-hmm. And for me, I personally just think that's wrong. That's the wrong thing to do. And so I will say that's wrong. I don't do that for this reason, right? Like if they bring up something that is just against my values, against my morals, and something I think is just, the wrong thing to do, I think it's okay.
That's like clearly harming somebody.
Yeah. And I think people are going to have different opinions, and maybe your opinion, for whatever reason, is that some approach to parenting is wrong. It's okay to say that if that's what you really believe, and understand that that kid is going to carry that pretty significant statement by you into the world. And don't be surprised if they say those sorts of things like around your parents or around your friends or around other kids they meet. Mm-hmm. And then they should sort of be prepared to deal with that. Right. And so, sometimes it's okay to take a stand. My, viewpoint, generally speaking, is where intelligent people can disagree. I try to leave it open to my kids. Where there's physical harming involved or, emotional abuse or things like that, that's when I do step in and say, okay, in a case like this, sure. Right. Don't do that. One thing, right?
I have a little story that I'm thinking of from a while ago.
Stories are great, darling.
Well, so years ago, our oldest, who's now almost 9, was probably 3 or 4. And we were visiting my family in New Jersey, and we were driving around the town that I grew up in, and we drove past the middle school I went to. And I was like, oh, that's the middle school I went to when I was 11 to 15 or whatever. And my oldest said, we were in the car with my mom, and my oldest said to his grandma, my mom, Mimi, why did you force mommy to go to school? And it was really interesting because, I had a moment where I was like, oh, have we I was trying to decide if we had been presenting our choice to him a little bit too strongly. Do you know what I mean? And I think we probably had been, as I look back, because I think we were still newer to the idea of self-directed education, and we were just really fired up about it and we're still really passionate about it, and we love what's happening with our family because of it. But I think as so many people, when you discover something new and different and you really, really start to understand it or try to understand it and you get excited about it, maybe we went a little overboard. Because when he said that, I was like, oh, that's not what I really want him to think. And I kind of explained to him, I was like, well, listen, I never felt forced, right? It didn't feel like I was, and if I presented or if I talked about what we're doing that in a way that made you think I was feeling forced to go somewhere every day, I want you to know that for me, that wasn't the case. Some kids might feel that way, but for me, it was just fine. It was all I ever knew. The options for alternatives were much less known about those days. My mom was raising me and my sister by herself and had to work full time. Right. So there were so many reasons that school worked out for our family at the time that we chose it. And I just didn't really want him having the impression that every kid who goes to school, that it's this incredibly violent, forceful experience. So that was just kind of interesting. I just felt like it made me re-examine the way that I presented our choices to him.
Yeah, I think it's always good to re-examine. I think a reality that many kids are forced to go to school. And to your point, though, some of the realities that cause that to happen are also just the way of the world. Like you said, your mom was a single mom. Even if these alternatives were front of mind for her, which they probably weren't, just given the time that we grew up, she probably wouldn't have been able to do it, right? So,
and she wasn't seeing, like, my sister and I, for the most part, weren't the kids who were really struggling. Like, school was kind of okay for us. Like, we were pretty happy and we were making friends, and we weren't going in and being miserable every day as some kids are.
Yeah. And I've said often, especially with my work continuing on at this Liberated Learner Center, Big Fish, that school will work for many kids. It's just that it won't work for some.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the discussion gets interesting. It's like, well, so what options should be available for the people for whom it's not working? Because I think everyone would acknowledge that it's just not working for some people.
Absolutely.
And now we're just talking about solutions after that. And I think in a perfect world for me, more options would be more available to more people. But that has nothing to do with the question at hand, which is like explaining to our kids just the realities of the world, that people are going to make different decisions for themselves, that they oftentimes, almost always, especially when it involves their own kids, have really good intentions. And that's similar to basically every decision that most good people make, right? Like, we only touched on these briefly, but something like religion, the possibilities for religious beliefs are pretty much infinite.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't need to go into some long diatribe about my feelings about quote unquote organized religion with our kids, because I just don't want to be involved in it personally. And they're going to see that by virtue of the fact that I'm never taking them there. I'm never bringing them there, but I also don't need to be too worried if someone else in their life is taking part in that stuff, because that's their decision. And then my kids can see the benefits it brings to those people, and not have to carry my own personal baggage and experience into every single interaction in their life, the way many of us wind up doing when it comes to our own parents.
Yeah, because I think we have the things that we value and are important to us, but ultimately what goes hand in hand with the way that we're raising our kids to think for themselves is I also ultimately want them to come to their own conclusions about the decisions that we're making. And maybe they're going to make different decisions for themselves one day. Right now, we are not a religious family, but James's parents are, who live next door, and our two older kids, one of them, his philosophy right now kind of falls where James and I are, and the other one says that he falls more with where his grandparents are. So I think I appreciate and enjoy that my kids can kind of be exposed to different ideas and kind of over the course of their lives decide what is making sense to them at the time and what they believe to be right for them.
Yeah, and I think we can always be asking our kids critical thinking questions about their own beliefs and approaches to things. And we're doing this constantly, given that we're just living in community with our kids basically all day. How is this choice that you're making affecting the rest of your life right now? Is it bringing you joy? Is it bringing you stress? Why are you believing the things that you believe right now? What are you singing in your world that affirms that belief or makes you question it or whatever, right? And if we're helping our kids to ask questions like that, they're going to be more likely to arrive at truths that are comfortable for them, which is really the point of all of this, right? It's not about getting little carbon copies of ourselves.
Yeah.
We'll go around parroting our beliefs to everybody, only to realize that they're standing on a house of cards when they're in their 20s, not even knowing why they believe what they believe.
Yeah, totally.
Which is another thing I'll express to my kids too. And I'll do this pretty openly, which is that many people just aren't really thinking very much about the decisions they're making in some regards. And it's, again, not to be critical of those other people, but it's more to inspire my own kids to be thinking. And so if you meet somebody who seems to believe something but doesn't have a lot of good reasons for it, you don't need to attack them or anything, but just notice how that feels and probably try to avoid it, because it oftentimes doesn't lead to happiness to hold beliefs that you've never examined.
Sure.
Cool. So are we pretty good on this subject?
I think so.
Babe, we went deeper than I thought we might, and that's okay. But let's move on to the next subject, which I think is a good one too. So this comes from a different group member, and I haven't asked for permission to share her name. But the general gist of things is that she has multiple children of different genders, and the girl child that she has is always given girl toys by other family members, quote unquote girl toys, right? Like pink stuff, unicorns, frilly dresses, stuff like that. And then the boy children are getting more normative boy objects like race cars and dinosaurs and stuff. And the daughter is feeling some amount of discomfort with that because she's not that interested in the traditionally quote unquote female toys and stuff. And the mom is, it seems like, really experiencing distress as well because she just doesn't want to watch her daughter go through that. She feels as though she's expressed to other family members, hey, she's not really interested in those other things, and is just kind of feeling exasperated at the whole thing, right? Like the strong feeling that she has that her daughter or she and her daughter have these strong feelings about what objects or how she wants her daughter to be treated, and other people just aren't following in line. So this is a really, I think, common experience for people, again, who are parenting pretty intentionally. And it's the age-old kind of uncomfortable question around what do we do when other people are interacting with our children in a way that we wouldn't choose? Does that sound good?
It sounds great.
You're just nodding, though. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think for me, definitely this person made it clear that they've communicated to the family how this is feeling. And I would ask, like, if I could talk to her, I would ask more questions about what types of ways they've tried to communicate this. Because I think, and maybe they've tried this, but I think for me, something I would do is if it was a given that family members were going to be buying gifts for my kids for certain occasions, I would just go ahead and shoot them an email of like, here's a few things that each of my kids has really been loving lately. And here's a couple things they've mentioned that they would love. These would be great gifts for them. We so appreciate that you always buy them gifts on their birthdays.
Great gift giving hack, even if you're not having this problem, by the way.
Yeah. And so like, and actually we've gotten to the point where both of our sets of parents just kind of ask us, like, what do you think your kids would want? Because they really want to get them things that they'll appreciate and enjoy and that will be, worth paying for, that are actually going to get used. But I think, maybe this woman has tried that, but I instead of kind of coming to the grandparents or family members with like, we would really appreciate if you wouldn't buy girly things, that's feeling hard for her, I would just come at it from like here are some things that my daughter is loving right now. And I would just do it for all of the kids because it might just be taken, like they may not be as defensive about it because if it's just about the daughter, then they're going to think, oh, she hates all the things we've gotten her. She should just be grateful. I think I would just go ahead and start making it a part of my rhythm to just send specific things that my kids have been loving with some gratitude for the fact that they're always buying gifts and see how that goes. It may or may not work. If they continue to just buy super girly things for this child that this child doesn't appreciate, I don't know. I mean, I think I would try to have a conversation with my daughter to help put it in perspective in a sense of like, because I can see how that would feel hard for a kid. And I also think we could try to help a kid see that it's really not about them. It's more about the grandparents. But I don't know exactly how I'd have that conversation.
Yeah, I think you're pointing to something that I think is the most important part of this for me. And by the way, I think those are great techniques that you put forth. Like,
well, thanks.
You're welcome, honey.
Yeah.
But I think when you put it really clearly with folks, you put them in a position to succeed in a way that's very different. It's like back to our previous conversation. If you're telling someone what to rule out and you're saying like, hey guys, like the girly gifts really have to stop. Like Melanie doesn't like these. And they're like, okay. So you're telling me I've been getting the wrong gifts. Thanks. What am I supposed to get her? Like, because some people just might not be very like confident gift givers. I don't
and I
love
also
giving gifts, frankly, like because, or especially like
you don't.
Well, I like the feeling of finding the right gift for someone and giving it to them. But when it comes to like the obligatory gift giving holidays, and it's like you're going to buy a trinket for Aunt Sally for her stocking or whatever, like that causes me to feel anxiety, just being honest with you.
Yeah, you can listen to our Christmas episode and hear more about that from James.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know. That's just the feeling that arises in me. Who knows why? And I think a lot of people feel that way, especially when it comes to gift giving for children. They feel like it's a huge deal and they want to wow and impress and delight these children. And it comes from, again, a very, very good place. And when you start ruling out options, that's going to raise the anxiety even more because it does two things. It says, not only have I not really liked the gifts you've given my kids in the past, but there's a good chance you're going to mess it up again.
Yeah, I think I would just like try like a full reset of like next time, like a month or two before whatever holiday or gift giving event is coming, just like sending like just a really open, kind email of like, hey, here's each of the kids and things that they're loving, and I think they would really appreciate.
Exactly. Easy. A couple sentences, the appreciative tone, I think gets really, goes a long way there. And I think there's like a second layer to the conversation that goes with this as well, though, because sometimes people just aren't going to hear you and aren't going to follow through. And this is a reality. And I think how we handle it will oftentimes really impact how our kids are perceiving the situation. So if we get right into consoling them and playing it up as this big deal and giving a ton of weight to the fact that grandma once again showed up with the girly dresses and stuff like that, our kid is probably going to feel it a lot harder than they would if we just had a frank and honest conversation with them, just like we're doing now, right? Like where we sit and say, hey, I know that dresses aren't your favorite thing to receive as a gift. So let's just put that out there right now. I saw that you weren't totally excited. I want to say thank you to you for being gracious with grandma when this happened, because you can tell hopefully that she really loves you and just wants to get you things that delight you. But for whatever reason, she's just hasn't been landing on things that have really done that.
Yeah. Know? I mean, can I interject? I would also not, and this would be hard for me, and maybe in the moment I would fail at this, but as I'm sitting here talking, I don't think I would make my kid feel like they had to appear really gracious if they didn't feel grateful.
I'm not saying that I would force them to do that either. I'm just saying, like, and nobody else has the context unless you were in the Facebook group, but she said, like, oftentimes the kids are pretty good about that and they do understand it.
But I'm just saying, like, I think for me, I would try to get myself to the place where I was actually okay with my kid just kind of not being super excited, especially if it had been expressed multiple times to family members that these are just things that they were not appreciating.
Yeah, they don't need to feign enthusiasm.
Yeah.
But I think it's still always nice when someone is trying to do something thoughtful for you, to be gracious with them, even if they haven't gotten it exactly right. And I think that's okay.
I mean, I do think it's okay too, but I think if it's like a repetitive incident when somebody has been like kind of given feedback over and over again, I kind of think you can let the kid express their true feelings. It might be uncomfortable, but I think if family members have been kind of like requested multiple times to kind of be a little bit more open to what this kid is really hoping for, if they actually want to be buying gifts, I don't know.
Yeah, and I hope I never suggested that you should force your kids to act grateful for something they're not grateful for. So I agree. I'm not disagreeing with that point at all. I am saying that when in doubt, being kind and gracious with people who spent their money on you is a good place to start. That's all I'm saying. And if it is a repetitive thing, or if there's all this other extenuating circumstance or whatever, then yes, sure. I would never want to make the holiday about putting pressure on my kids to act a certain way, because that also kind of ruins it for them, right? Like, you're opening the gift and in the back of your mind, you're playing the tape of like, okay, smile and nod and say thanks no matter what this is, like that's not where they should have to be. We agree. But I think that fast forward to the point I was driving at, which is more like, how do we help them to actually process it after the fact? I think, again, like with all things, you can spend a ton of your time wondering why someone was trying to slight you, or why they weren't listening to you, or why they don't care about you enough to get you the gifts that you actually want. Or we can put ourselves in the shoes of the other people. And that's where I would try to go when it would come to my own kids. Now, this hasn't really been a problem in our family. You've done a really great job of communicating what our kids are interested in. Everyone in our lives has done a great job of hearing that and mostly just getting them things they like and treating them in ways they appreciate. And I recognize that sometimes that's not always going to be the case. And so I'd like to move into that conversation around, okay, so there's someone because this doesn't have to be just regarding the gender roles thing, right? Like, we can zoom out and see examples of this everywhere, where sometimes there are just people in your life who are going to hear or see that you want to be treated in a different way, and they don't. So how do we proceed from there? Right.
I don't know. That's what I was saying. I'm not sure how I would have that conversation with my kid, but it seems like you might have an idea.
I might have an idea.
Yeah, I can should take it away then.
Sure. So I start by trying to put myself in the shoes of the person that's causing whatever offense is going on. And in this case, just because this is the hypothetical we're kind of working through right now, I might say something like, let's think about why grandma is getting you these gifts. It could be that when grandma was a little girl, she really loved getting gifts like this. I might talk to my kids about love languages. Like, that's I think a very useful framework for thinking about why people are treating others the way they're treating them, right? So the general gist of the love languages idea is that oftentimes people express love and gratitude in the way they like to receive love and gratitude. And so For the grandma that's very huggy and affectionate, that might be because she likes hugging and affection. For the person that just can't seem to stop giving gifts, they probably love to receive gifts and be a part of that whole process. And in this particular instance, helping my child to see that grandma's trying to put herself in the shoes of a little girl like she was once, think about all the things she would have loved to receive and give those things to you. And it's not ideal and it's not really what you want, but it's coming from that place of love. Because I don't think we need to put our child or inhabit this place ourselves of resentment, because that's so often the tone in conversations like this. It's like, oh, why can't they just see that this is like the wrong thing to do? Sometimes if people have been doing something long enough, it's also really hard to change and find a new habit. And I might help my child to see that as well. And I might also move the conversation towards a place where we're not entitled to gifts in general. Like no one needs to show up and give us any gifts. So the fact that grandma's trying her best and trying to give us gifts, even if they're gifts we don't like, we don't need to be angry with grandma for that. We don't need to resent her or to take it as some kind of condemnation of our choices. But maybe if there are gifts that you really want that grandma's unwilling or unable to buy for whatever reason, maybe we can help you get those. So what did you want? You wanted a skateboard or dinosaur trucks or whatever? Back to the dinosaur trucks.
Whatever that is.
Yeah, dinosaur trucks. I think there's a show once, but we'll get you that, right? So I don't know. I think it's reframing the conversation less around this person who's messing up and especially away from this person wants to ignore us or, any of these kind of like badly intentioned actions where they just don't want to do the right thing, assume that they want to do the nice thing, the kind thing, the thoughtful thing, and that they're, for whatever reason, kind of unable to do that right now. And I think that's like a fine way to think about it. And it's a way to think about things that can keep relationships intact, and it doesn't have to be as stressful and angst driven.
Yeah, I think I have a similar but slightly different take as I'm listening to you and thinking about it. I think that, I don't know if it said it in the group, and it doesn't really matter right now, like the age of the child, because I think handling it with my kid would definitely depend on not only their age, but like their personal kind of processing and maturity level, emotional maturity, intellectual maturity. I think I might, and again, for the person who posted in the group, like there might be more baggage tied up in it at this point if this has been going on for a while, but I think I might try to back up and just ask a lot of questions and be really open to hearing how my kid is actually feeling about it. And again, this could be hard if we have our own issues with it that I've done this with my kids about other things, like that I've kind of not realized I was doing this, but laid my own issues on top of it for them to see. And then they kind of adopt my baggage. But I think I would really try to just start fresh and find out how it, get them talking about it. Because I think if they are on their own without my interpretation, if the kid is really feeling like they're not being seen, I would start with validating that. And I know that sometimes that can seem like that's kind of counter to what you're saying in some ways. But if my kid was really having like an independent feeling of, if they're like watching their brothers get all these things that to them seem really awesome, and then they're getting things that they could care less about, and they're just really feeling like they're not being seen, and they're coming to me with that, I would validate it. I would. Sure. I would spend a lot of time radically validating it. And then I think when my kid was able to, like if it was clear that they were really hurt on that, then I would try to kind of help them see the reasons that it could be happening and help them see where that family member could be coming from and what challenges might be in front of that family member that are making this happen. But I think I would be really careful to first really validate them, because I think if I just went, and you might not have been saying this, but if I just went to trying to explain the behavior and didn't give the kids space to like process their feelings, that the kid might just not have that chance. And I think that opportunity is really important. And again, I think this is kind of sensitive because I think I would want to be super careful to not lay my own feelings on top of it if I was feeling like really, really fed up and frustrated. I'd really want it to just be fresh. So I think it would be like a lot of questions and a lot of open-ended listening and a lot of like, yeah, it's you mentioned you're feeling this way. Like, I hear you. It's hard to feel that way.
Yeah, I think I really love that spin on things, because you're right. Sometimes, especially if it's a hot button issue for someone, and I think gender conformity or the lack thereof can oftentimes become this, where it's like I had friends who were quote unquote tomboys or whatever growing up, and it gets old after a while, I'm sure, to be like, yo, I just want to play baseball.
Yeah.
And just get yet another dress that I'm never going to wear. And if a kid has hit that point where they're coming to you or like you could see it in them, like just that total disappointment when they looked at their brother getting the new sweet skateboard and they got yet another dress or a tiara or something, that it's totally cool to bring them aside and validate that.
And
I think that's a great place to start.
I don't even think I would be like, if I talk to them about that later, I don't think I would necessarily try to be like, hey, you looked really disappointed when that happened. Again, I would just say like, hey, how are you feeling about how it went today? I'd really just try to leave it open to them, even if they have been disappointed in the past. Because again, just being careful not to like lay my own issues on top of it. But yeah, I do think that's important. And then I would go from there to strategizing with them, like letting them know what I was doing to try to help. Like, hey, next time this happens, or next holiday that's coming up, I'm going to like send a list of things that you would love to your family member. And all these things that you got today, like if you really don't care about them, who can we give them to in our life that might like them? And I would also, I'm guessing on many of these gift giving occasions, the parents are also giving gifts to the kids. So I would also just model the gift giving like I would be giving my kid. And maybe I would try to create a situation where the family members were seeing what I was giving them. Because sometimes the gift giving doesn't happen for all parties at the same time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I would try to like let it be clear to those family members what my kids were getting from me. So they could kind of see that being modeled, and I'd remind my kid about that. And yeah, I think I'd kind of like let my kid know that we had some plans in place to try to help this. And then, help them put into perspective, like why this could be happening and give them some tools and help them to have some empathy for the person for sure at some point.
Yeah. And I think starting with the empathy, starting with the listening is really well and good. I think the second part of this is like what kind of conversations need to be had with family members who just like simply refuse to, acknowledge our kids' preferences or whatever. Like I'm reminded of another group of friends of ours whose son was really into like more normatively feminine objects like dolls and stuff like that. And I remember specifically there was a Facebook thread where another, like a mutual friend was kind of teasing him about that and be like, at some point, like, you just got to stop buying your kid dolls or whatever. Mm-hmm. And this friend just came out and was like, hey, I love you, but you're just being an a-hole right now.
Yeah.
Like, at some point, you can just stand up and be like, yeah, we're not just going to. And I think it actually, like, I've seen people handle this more aggressively the other way, which is like the boy who's into more quote unquote girly things where people just feel at liberty to kind of like tease and make jokes and like, oh yeah, he's a little like limp wristed, like whatever kind of ways guys joke about things. And it's more from like my generation and older. I think will hopefully be less common among the younger folks.
Yeah,
but
I think it will.
I think at some point it's okay. Like if they're just like sticking with it and they're like, I'm not going to buy your kid a doll. Be like, well, then no offense, but like, just feel free to not buy him anything. And like, maybe don't even come because if you're going to come, just
it's
like tease him and
it
make him uncomfortable.
definitely depends on like the way the family member is receiving feedback. And if it, you can usually tell when for somebody, they're just really not getting it or they're kind of purposely like going hard at this thing.
Yeah. Cause sometimes people will dig in. In my experience, it's often been men, but I'm sure it goes the other way too. People will just dig in on something they just think is like fair game or whatever. And yeah, it's okay just to be like, I just don't, this is just not what Christmas is about for me, bud. Like,
and I think, I don't know, this might sound callous and I probably said this about other things before, but I don't think it is. Ultimately too, like, I would love for my kids to have great relationships with their extended family members. And if my kids and our family are like giving pretty clear feedback about certain ways that they're being interacted with, and the family members continue to interact in the way that my kids don't appreciate, like ultimately they're making a decision to put their relationship with my kid at jeopardy. And if I'm trying to share feedback and it's not working and my kid ultimately starts to make the decision to kind of like back away a bit and protect themselves and take space from that person, and the relationship doesn't develop into this beautiful relationship that I hoped it would be, I also sometimes just get to a place where I can think, and this doesn't really happen in our life, but I can like imagine like that's just okay too. Like, not everybody is going to be a good fit for everybody. Not every relationship is going to be the very best. And if my kids kind of take space from a certain relationship because they're not being seen or heard, I can talk to them about how it feels and support them, and ultimately just say like, this grown up at this point is making a choice to alienate my child a little bit. And I'm going to find a way to support my kid through that and be at peace with it and not keep trying to like accept relationships for what they are. I mean, I've gone through relationships like that in my own life, right? Friendships that have kind of fallen apart a little bit, or you just realize there's things that aren't working and you kind of put them in perspective and you move on.
Yeah, well, because so often it just gets passed on to the child to be like the bigger person for whatever reason, or just like keep dealing with the irritating aunt, uncle, grandfather, whatever. And that's just obviously not fair. Like, why would you make the weakest person, the lowest person on the power dynamic or on the food chain kind of have to deal with everyone else's crap? I'm right there with you. And I think, again, I'm going to go back to my kid after that and affirm them and also like help them to realize that the world just happens this way sometimes. Like people just aren't always going to treat you how you want to be treated. Sometimes you're going to want girly toys if you're a boy or vice versa, and people don't care and they're going to make fun of you for it sometimes. And you can't really stop him. Like all you can do is prepare for that. Hopefully they'll find people in your life who do affirm you and love you for who you are. You don't have to change, but you can't really expect them to change all the time either. And and
I think if as a parent, you keep modeling for your kid you keep letting your kid feel what it feels to be loved, unseen, unconditionally by you and your partner, if you have a partner. And hopefully like their siblings are seeing that and doing that for each other. Like they get to grow up knowing the difference between how those relationships feel. And I think that really helps them make healthier decisions as they get older. Like they have experience growing up in a relationship that, of course, it might not be perfect, right? We all make mistakes, but they're like, oh, right, this is what a healthy relationship feels like. This is what it feels like to be seen and heard and loved unconditionally.
Yeah. Agreed. I think we've done a pretty good job on these 2 questions, but I don't think we have time for a third.
No, I think we should wrap it up.
All right, well, then let's do it.
Well, thanks for joining us on this journey. And just remember, each moment is a new opportunity to be the parent you hope to be.
Love you guys. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to One Free Family. If you enjoy the podcast, please show your support by becoming a patron at onefreefamily.com/support. Your support will help make this show better. Plus, you can get access to rewards and additional episodes by joining. Again, that's onefreefamily.com/support. This has been a Pax Libertas Productions podcast.